the biblical figures, the enslaved community really saw them, took them in as their own ancestors. Uh, can you talk to me about more about that spiritual theme?
Certainly. So, Africans were tied to their ancestors. They believe that when a person dies, they're still with them in spirit, right? And so, once their physical presence leaves, their spiritual essence remains. As long as you remember them, as long as you call their name, they're always with you, and they join the realm of the ancestors, the Orishas. And so that idea is still present in the music, that our ancestors are with us. But they're also tied to the land, right? They're tied to that ancestral community. And to be ripped from one's ancestral land is to also it also means that your connection with your ancestors has now been severed, which is an interesting concept, which also speaks about proximity being important, right? So what tended to happen, just as they, in some ways, easily adopted Christianity, because this idea of a triune God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, was very familiar within this notion of a pantheon of gods. Almost all the African religions had an idea of a supreme God, a high God, one that was ruler and in charge of all things. And I would think that that equated for them with this Father within the Trinitarian Christian system. And then the idea that you have three gods, a triune God, God in three persons. They say, oh, okay, well, yeah, you got multiple gods, right? I got that. We also are familiar with this concept. And so this of God in three persons, the Christian God. But as they were disconnected, going back to their ancestors, um, for instance, the Orisha in Yoruba tribe would function in various ways. You know, you would have a lesser god that would be in control of fertility and god of water, god of the air and the sky and those kinds of things. And so when you're hearing about these or you read about these biblical, well, they weren't reading. When you would hear about these biblical figures um, that had not only power, but were connected to this higher God, that were victorious in winning battles, that was something that was needed within the community. And so, since they were severed from their own gods and ancestors, these new biblical figures took on an added meaning for them. And people like Joshua, mighty warrior, people like David, who was a favorite of God, people like Jonah, and Moses. You know, all of these people took on additional meaning for the enslaved African community. And there are many scholars, Lawrence Levine, um, Arthur Jones talks about this in his book Wade in the Water. Now these biblical figures take on added meaning and become adopted. It's like, well, now you are my ancestor. You are part of my family. You have meaning. There are stories now that I can connect with and ground me in my faith and in my being, in my existential being.